Thank you very much for having me. I'm very honored, especially hearing that the previous speaker was a Nobel Prize winner. So I'm glad that you all came in this holiday week. And so I'm going to talk about basically the last 10 years of research on social sensing that my colleagues and I did, and especially Henrik Olsson, who is here in the audience, and entertain you with kind of a potpourri of various research that we did in this sphere. So to understand various problems that we as human society are facing these days, from climate change and pandemics to misinformation and violent conflicts, we need to understand the underlying complex social systems. And they are composed of individual cognitions, strategies, and beliefs that people have, the social environments in which these individuals are embedded, the ways they communicate, the structure of these environments, and the various problems that they are facing. You know, from in early days we faced snakes or which way to go. Now we face climate change, cities, violent uprisings, and so on. The progress in understanding this human social complexity has been somewhat slow. And one of the reasons is that these different aspects of these complex social systems have been studied in different disciplines. Cognition has been studied in cognitive science, in social psychology, evolutionary anthropology, social environments, and some other disciplines, sociology, economics, computer science, problem structure in yet other disciplines, economics and organizational science. And computational social science, which is sometimes one of the labels I use to describe where I belong, has a potential to span these different aspects of human social complexity and develop computational models and collect various data that is today available about human sociality to help us understand these complex social systems. And today, as I said, I'll be focusing on human social sensing and human social cognition more generally. And what do I mean by that? So we, as a very successful social species, have developed a number of capacities for understanding our social environments. And some of them are judging social frequencies. How frequent are different characteristics of people in our environments? Judging other people's intentions, anticipating their behavior, judging network structure, evaluating others' beliefs, categorizing others according to different properties. And these capacities then help us to engage in a number of collective activities that are so important to us in our daily social lives, from cooperation and competition and collective action, engaging in social learning, constructing and obeying social norms, and so on. And these capacities for understanding our social environments we can call collectively social sensing, or ability to perceive and make inferences about what others think and do. And so today I will be talking about several things related to social sensing. First, how accurate social sensing is, and then what is the role of social sensing in complex social systems. And I will give two examples, social sensing in belief dynamics and social sensing as used to predict collective behavior. By the way, feel free to interrupt with clarification questions, and maybe I take longer questions at the end. Okay, so how accurate is human social sensing? If you open any textbook in psychology, I was educated as a psychologist, you get the impression that we have many cognitive biases, and also in social cognition, that we are just kind of quite almost incapable of understanding our social environments and our role in them, that we often think that we are better than others, or that everybody else thinks like us, and so on. And this is somehow puzzling, because we are the most successful species largely because we are so successful in our sociality. And so it's kind of puzzling that we are supposed to be so bad when we are actually so successful in being social. And so let's see a little bit at the evidence of the accuracy of human social sensing. And it's really a complicated picture, because it depends on what people are asked to do. If people are asked to do judgments of specific instances, of specific individuals, specific interactions, or whether they're asked to evaluate relative and long-run frequencies of these instances. Or the other factor is whether they're asked to evaluate immediate social circles, people they have immediate interactions with, or broader and more distant groups. And whether they're asked to judge more or less observable characteristics. Now, for this first factor, judgments of specific instances, indeed, if you ask people to judge political attitude or movie preferences, or just about anything about another person that they perhaps don't know so well. It's a Facebook friend. You often see this ego projection. People seem to think that this person is probably more similar to me than they really are. Here, this is the result from the study of Goel et al. In 2010. On the x-axis is the observed homophily, or the actual similarity between a friend and the person reporting. And on the y-axis is their subjective, perceived similarity. And so it's usually above the axis. People usually think that the friend is more similar to them in political attitudes and other characteristics than they are. On the other hand, this actually could be a good prior to have. If we don't know how the other person thinks, if we are in a relatively similar social environment, chances are that the environment is quite homophilous and that other people are actually similar to us. So this bias could be actually part of a almost rational cognitive process. Now, if people are asked about judgments of relative frequencies instead, rather than about a specific person, then they appear to be much better. So Henrik and I and colleagues have been studying that over the years. And a typical question we ask is, what percentage of certain group, in this case, your social circle, belongs to different categories of household wealth, and then you have from this amount of this range of euros, this range of euros, so on. Number of friends, how many friends they have, work stress. So on different scales, they kind of give percentages of their friends, family, colleagues, and other acquaintances that they're in regular contact with, who belong in these different categories. And so people give these estimates, and of course, these estimates are highly homophilous. People who are worse off on those characteristics, poorer people, people with fewer friends, and so on, they also have social circle who are kind of similar to them. But the interesting thing is, if you have a large representative national sample, like we were lucky to have then, and you average all of these social circle estimates, they average to be quite close to the actual population distribution. So this black line. And so this kind of suggests that there is perhaps no additional biases in these social circle estimates. But that on average they are, but that people are probably accurately perceiving their social circles and do not show some systematic biases. Okay, and then similarly, so far we were talking about characteristics of other people, such as wealth or number of friends. Similarly, if you ask about specific interactions with another person, so how many times did you see person X in the last 2 weeks, chances are you will be quite off. But if you ask people in general, how often do you see person X or your friends, then people are more accurate. Okay, and then the second factor that I mentioned is whether we are asked to judge immediate or more distant groups. As I already showed, the judgment of immediate groups seem to be relatively accurate. But when we ask people about more distant groups that they don't have immediate experience with, then certain biases show up. So here we ask what percentage of the general population is the same Dutch sample, belongs to each category of wealth, friends, and work stress. And when we average those and compare them with actual population distributions, then we see some systematic biases, which I will talk a little bit more about it just in a bit. And then before that, the third factor I mentioned is that social sensing is, of course, less accurate when characteristics are difficult to observe. Here we have different estimates of the population distributions for more observable characteristics such as income and wealth. Even if you cannot observe it correctly, people have some idea how wealthy people around them are, how many friends they have, how educated they are. And so you can see that these estimates, these kind of dotted lines, are quite close to the population estimates. And then for the less observable characteristics, these estimates are more off. There are more biases, of course. So I mentioned that there were some biases in these judgments. So what about these biases? So it turns out that these biases do not have to be attributed to problems in human cognition. For example, the famous Kruger-Dunning effect, it is said that some people, especially those who are worse off in a particular characteristic, are kind of so incompetent that they cannot even understand how worse off they are, whereas those who are better off tend to underestimate their position. And this is attributed to lack of intelligence or sometimes to motivational biases that people try to make up for their deficiencies and so on. It turns out that the explanation might be quite more boring. We show that it basically depends on the shape of the underlying frequency distribution in the population. Assuming that people are sampling from their social circles and making inferences to the general population, then just the shape of the true population distribution will explain these different biases. And of course, you can have an additional motivational bias or cognitive bias on top of it, but this is kind of proof of concept that you don't need to have any biases in cognition to explain it. Here is the example. So again, we have our 3 population distributions, and you see that they are differently shaped. Household wealth is kind of more what we call J left, work stress is more J right, we call it, or left skewed, and then the more symmetric one. And so when people are giving population estimates of household wealth in the general population, of course they infer this from what they see around them, from their social circle, but they know that people are not exactly like their social circle, so they dampen it a little bit. And so we have these distributions. And now to understand what direction the bias goes, it's useful to plot them as in a cumulative shape, so it's cumulative form. So it's exactly the same as in the middle on the cumulative form. And now we compare it with the true population distribution. And we see that both worse off and especially better off people actually underestimate the percentile that they're in. They think they're poorer than they really are. And this is kind of apparent self-depreciation bias. In opposite way, if you take another characteristic, such as work stress, and go through the same process and plot them in a cumulative form, now it appears that everybody thinks that they're better off. They overestimate their percentile in the population, and this is now apparent self-enhancement. And then when we have a symmetric distribution, then we get both of these biases. So those who are worse off appear to self-enhance, like in a Kruger-Dunning effect, and those who are better off appear to self-depreciate. So that's an interesting, and the implication of this is that people might be actually well adapted to their immediate social environments, and that all these biases have been documented are often because psychologists tend to disregard the structure of social environments in which people are embedded, in which minds operate. Another example of this is the neglect of the social network structure in psychological studies of biases. So we know as social scientists more broadly that social networks are often homophilic, like this on the left, where a person in the middle, the blue person, is mostly surrounded by blue individuals, and then indirectly connected to also some of the orange ones. And so if this person is asked to estimate the proportion of blue individuals in the overall population, if they go from their social circle, they will exhibit apparent false consensus. But if they happen to be in a more heterophilic network, where they are surrounded by more orange people, then they will exhibit apparent false uniqueness. They will now think that blue is more rare than it really is in the overall population. And we show in this study that's cited in the bottom that in survey data we can see this, that for many different characteristics in 3 different countries, you can basically explain apparent false consensus and false uniqueness without postulating any cognitive bias. It's all in the sample. So in sum, for this first part of my talk, is that human social sensing is actually reasonably accurate depending on what you ask. If you ask about relative frequencies, about immediate social circles that people depend on and really need to have knowledge of, and if their characteristics are observable, then social sensing is actually useful. And so there is hope for us as a species. So, any clarification questions? Okay. I'm sure there is a lot in your heads, but we can talk later. So now the second part is that I will talk about what is the role of social sensing in complex social systems. And my first example will be social sensing in belief dynamics. Now what do we mean by belief dynamics? Here I take the very broad definition of beliefs as any kind of opinion or preference or value that we have related to different issues, from our daily lives to more broader societal issues. And especially how these beliefs change over time. That's the topic of this topic of interest here. And so we all like to look at this survey data about views, British views about EU, or percentage of people who say that global climate change is a threat, or that gun control should be instituted, so on. Okay, and so there are hundreds of models of belief dynamics out there. And kind of mirroring the disciplinary silos that I mentioned before, there are kind of 2 types of these models. One type, maybe predominant type, many such models, sociology, economics, statistical physics, is to focus on the social network and then look at how usually just one belief spreads in this social network. The assumption is that belief of the other person, this orange person here, is accurately perceived, and then it just spreads through the network from person to a person according to different rules and different dynamics. So that's one type. The other type, basically not communicating with the first type, is in psychology, is developed in the memory literature originally, in semantic reasoning. And so there are a lot of these models of semantic networks which you can use to model beliefs, but they are reserved to the single individual. And these models are then more nuanced within the mind, because they postulate the whole networks of beliefs that people have, and some of them are about different topics. Other beliefs are social beliefs about what other people think, and then you can have this whole thing within the single person. These two types basically never communicate. Now, those models that use social networks usually use objective measures of social networks. So especially now, there is, of course, the explosion of all the data that we never had before. Is super exciting, from social media, then these studies that use these wearable devices that detect who is in the vicinity, cell phone data and so on, to find out who is in people's social networks, and then this can be imputed in the models of belief dynamics to predict how beliefs spread. However, what is really important is what is in persons' heads, because we rarely take into account our whole social network, everyone we are ever connected with. Depending on the topic, depending on the question, time of the day, various primes that we experience, we will focus on different parts of the social network. And so subjective network really is important. And it is really easy to manipulate. So here is just an example from a recent experiment that we did. It's a bit clunky interface about group decision making. And so here people were asked to solve a task where they had to find the best combination of different properties of a product. It was an NK environment of different kinds of complexity. And they could solve it either on their own or by looking at these or by looking at the solutions of other people, these little boxes below. And then we give them just verbal instruction, and we remind them with this little picture here that in some conditions they should focus on other members to a limited degree, in other conditions moderate degree or high degree. It's really, we never thought this would work, but it really primes people to focus more or less on others. And so the results, I will not go into detail, but basically their payoffs in different in tasks with different complexity highly depend on this instruction. So it's just one example that subjectively, that subjective social networks are really what matters, and not what they actually have available and what we would measure objectively. Now, how could we model these subjective social networks? Well, we have a recent model with Henrik and our postdoctoral Marie Curie fellow, Jonas Dallege. And so let me kind of give an idea how this could be incorporated in these belief dynamics models. So we start here with this idea that there is, of course, these external networks in which people are embedded, but also that people have these internal networks of beliefs in their heads. And these internal networks of beliefs have some what we call personal beliefs, and these are beliefs related to a certain topic. For example, here we are focusing on climate change. This is this kind of thermometer and a little Earth in the middle, and this belief about climate change might depend on other beliefs that people have, such as science, economic development, competition with other countries, and so on. So, and of course, there is many different beliefs that one can put there. And then there are also so-called social beliefs, or beliefs about what other people around me think about climate change. And then the link between any two people is actually my belief about what these people thinks about this focal topic about climate change here. And vice versa, the link that this person has to me is their belief about what I think about the topic. And so basically, so now we have kind of connection between the external network and the internal network through this definition of links as the perceived belief of the other person about a particular topic. And then we pull a dusty book from the shelf, which is Festinger's cognitive dissonance theory, which is often used in various theories of belief dynamics, to then start thinking how would dissonances felt in different parts of these networks affect belief dynamics. And so first let's introduce some visual notation, and then we'll introduce some mathematical notation. So let's say that all personal beliefs are squares, and all social beliefs are triangles, and the whole blob that we have in the head, the whole constellation of beliefs, or individual in this case, is circle. So now we can replace them with these squares, triangles, and circles. And now we can start with some notation. So let me see how this works. Okay, doesn't matter. So you see this? Yeah. So the personal beliefs are denoted with B, Bi, Bj. Then and they are connected together with these omega links. Then we have social beliefs that are connected to personal beliefs and also have a correlation with personal beliefs. And then we have actual beliefs of another person, and then there is some link there. So there is some correlation between the actual belief of the other person and my social belief of this person. So this is kind of the basic ingredients of the model. And now we can start thinking how the dissonances in these different parts work together. So first there is a personal, we postulate 3 types of dissonance. First there is a personal dissonance. This is a dissonance in this cloud here. The dissonance between different beliefs I have. So I could believe that I could have certain beliefs about abortion, but also some religious beliefs or other political beliefs that are in conflict with these personal beliefs. Then I could have some social dissonance. So my beliefs about abortion might be in more or less conflict with people, with beliefs of my friends about abortion. And so basically the dissonance there, and all of these dissonance calculated as sums of products of these different beliefs measured on a scale from -1 to 1, weighted by the link between them. And then we have external dissonance, which is again what I think my friends think about abortion and what they really think. And this is some kind of external validity. And so how accurately I perceive them will contribute to this external dissonance. The realization that I'm not perceiving them correctly might contribute to the dissonance. But now, how much I'm actually, so of course we all go with these big clowns in our heads, and most of the time we just cannot be bothered to pay attention. We cannot pay attention. There are many of the inconsistent beliefs in our heads. But when we pay attention, then we might feel this dissonance, and then it might prompt actual belief change. And so whether a potential dissonance becomes a felt dissonance depends on the attention to this personal, social, and external dissonances. And we call them beta because we borrow on statistical physics speak, where these H's here are Hamiltonians, and these are energy functions, and these betas here are inverse temperatures in these equations. And so the equations are really simple. So here's the equation for updating personal beliefs. So these B's here update in a way that minimizes the dissonance with other personal beliefs and also with social beliefs. So this is this equation. And the other equations for updating social beliefs, they update so to minimize the dissonance between them and their personal beliefs and the actual beliefs of the person. And so that's it. There is no more to the model. Those are the equations. And now we can test predictions of the model using empirical data. Being psychologists, we like to test our models with the data. And so therefore, we collected a lot of survey data. And I'll just check the time. There it is. Great. We collected a lot of survey data. And here I focus on 2 data sets. One is this large on mechanical Turk, and the other is on a nice national representative sample in 2 ways, where we both invited people and their friends as well. So we have both this kind of actual belief and the perceived beliefs of friends. And then we asked them these questions about beliefs. So I was talking about climate change, abortion. So we asked about various things. These examples are about GM food. Very interesting topic. So the focal belief is it very unsafe or very safe to eat GM food? The relevant personal beliefs in the cloud, in the blue cloud of personal beliefs, are various other things that people might believe about GM food that might affect their belief about safety of GM food. And examples are whether growing GM food is harmful or beneficial to the environment, is it very natural to eat GM food, and so on. Also, we had questions about farmers, big companies, and so on. And then we asked about social beliefs. Now, so we asked people, think about several contacts. Now think about this contact. Do you think that this contact would say that it is very unsafe or safe to eat GM food? And then we ask questions about attention to dissonance. And for that, we tried different things. And what works best is to ask how important it is that my beliefs towards the topic are not in conflict with each other for personal attention. For social, how important it is that my personal beliefs and beliefs of the friend are not in conflict. And for external, it is important to me that I know what the friend actually thinks about GM food. And we did all kinds of tests and factor analysis, and we find over and over that these are actually three different factors. There are in a way, we do find confirmation that there are three distinct dissonances, at least these three, in this data. And now we can see what are some model predictions about the effects of attention to different dissonances. First, let's look at effects of attention to personal dissonance. So we are now in this blue cloud. And the model predicts that if a person is paying low attention to the potential conflicts between these different beliefs, for example, about GM food or abortion, then everybody will end up with some kind of moderate beliefs centered around middle point. But if they start paying attention, then beliefs will become more extreme. So they will have kind of moderate society in the first place, but once people are starting to discuss it, pay attention, then we'll have more polarized society. And in our survey data, we find such a pattern. So if we divide people in our big sample, the first one, in those who gave low importance to personal dissonance, all the way up to those who gave high importance to the personal dissonance, meaning in our speak, that these pay low attention to any dissonance between their personal beliefs and these more, then we see that these are kind of more moderate, whereas those who think that the topic is, that it's important to them, that their beliefs are in sync, they're more polarized on this focal belief. So this is a distribution of, for the belief in safety of GM food. Okay. Then we can see what are the effects of attention to social dissonance. This is this red cloud. This is how much people pay attention to whether my own beliefs are in sync or not with what I think other people think. The prediction here is that if I have several friends, and 10 friends, and for each of them I have certain belief about what they think, then if I don't pay attention to my social dissonance, the variance of this belief will be larger. And if I pay attention, they will all start to look similar to me. The variance will be smaller. And this is what we actually see in our survey data. So first we see that variance of social beliefs actually is negatively related to the amount of attention, which here measured as importance of social dissonance. And the reason for this is that because of this dissonance between social beliefs and personal beliefs, social beliefs get pulled in the direction of personal beliefs. The difference between social and personal beliefs declines. And everybody kind of starts thinking, like, if I am a staunch Republican, I will have more tendency to see more of the other people around me as Republican. And you will think, the polls are lying, it is not possible. Everyone I know believes the same as I do. So that's that kind of effect. And then finally, if you look at the effects of attention to external dissonance, then the model predicts something interesting, that if you don't pay much attention to this, whether I really know what the other person thinks, you kind of, okay, whatever. Then the prediction is that the personal beliefs about GM food, the focal beliefs, will kind of be not so extreme. But when the attention to this external dissonance is high, then personal beliefs become more extreme. And the prediction is because the more attention to this dissonance will pull the social beliefs in a certain direction, which will then pull personal beliefs along, and so we will end up with a more extreme, even personal beliefs. And that's again what we kind of see in our survey data. So this is the attention to external dissonance on the x-axis, on the y, this extremity of personal beliefs. And actually it is somewhat higher for those people who pay more attention to external dissonance. Another measure of this was how frequently they discuss things with friends, which also will then enable people to see this dissonance in a way, also increasing the attention to this dissonance. Sorry. Okay, so those are some tests of these basic assumptions of the model, and now we can play on, and in our paper we have a lot of these simulations, but here is just a brief overview of how we could explain then polarization and consensus with this model. Of course, every model of belief dynamics can explain some version of polarization and consensus, And this model can too, but then in addition, maybe it provides some additional predictions that other models can't, and kind of provides a framework for starting to evaluate or compare different models empirically. Okay, so the question here is, say that we have a society which has two groups which are somehow maybe geographically separated, but otherwise have a pretty similar mixture of beliefs. And now the question is, what will happen over time? Will there be no change? Will there happen polarization within groups? Will there be polarization between groups? So some people will become red or blue, or will there become consensus? And now we can study that using model simulations in the space of different attentions to external dissonance, social dissonance, and personal dissonance. I will just go briefly that basically if the attention to all of these three dissonances is low, there will be no change. We just don't care, so nothing happens. However, if attention to both social and external dissonances is high, then there is a strong drive to conform to others. I want to know what other people think, and I want to conform to them. And this will create uniformity within each group. And that can then go, depending on the minute differences in initial conditions, either to this complete global polarization or to global consensus. So 50-50 chance to end up in one or the other world. Then in all other conditions, when people are paying any attention, this will end up in some polarization within groups, but not this global polarization. Okay, let me wrap up here so that I also go to the last part of the talk. So here I was talking about social sensing and belief dynamics, and it seems that these subjective social networks, social beliefs, and attention to them can be important for understanding these nuances in belief dynamics. Quick clarification questions? Okay. Now, the last part is to see how social sensing can be used to predict collective behavior. This now goes to the first part of the talk, where I was showing some results that social sensing can actually be quite accurate if we ask about relative frequencies and if we ask about immediate social circles. And now the question is, okay, people are some kind of sensor. They know something about their worlds. They are not completely biased in a cognitive, motivational way. Could they help us as social researchers, political scientists, sociologists, to understand, to get better information about the social environments out there? So this is a very practical implication of the work, but we were excited about it, or still are. So this is the question. Our social world is explored in so many ways. You know, what we record what we buy, cell phone activity, social media data, surveys, experiments, and still we have gaps. We don't know everything about everyone yet. The idea of human social sensors is if we have a good sample of people in the population, a nice representative sample, and ask them to report about their social circles, will that help us to fill the gaps and improve prediction of collective behavior? And we do that in national elections. National elections are nice because they have a result quickly. So you can do your studies, and then you get a result, and you can compare the accuracy of predictions with different methods. And so that's why we already conducted 6 studies in 4 different countries. And so in election polls, they typically ask about own voting intentions, right? So they ask, if you were to vote in the election, which candidate would you choose? Or a more involved question, if you vote in the election, what is the % chance that you will vote for the candidate? It has been shown by a group from USC that this is actually a better question than a just categorical question for making predictions. Anyhow, so that's still own voting intentions. Now the question is, can social sensing improve this? And now we ask people, of all your social contacts who are likely to vote, what % will vote for a particular candidate? And social contacts we define as friends, family, colleagues, and other acquaintances, of voting age, who have you communicated with at least briefly the last month. And it doesn't really matter what exact definition we give, as long as it's some kind of immediate social circles that we communicate with regularly. It seems that what people are giving us is some kind of general impression of their social world and not really counting. So, but yeah, that's the definition we gave. And now, the first of these studies that we did was in 2016 US presidential election. And we had access to several waves of these nice poll, which was done on a representative national sample. It was a panel of participants who were able to track the same participants over time. And this slide shows the absolute error of forecasts, so lower is better, for own intentions shown in blue and the social circle estimates shown in red. And all the way up to the elections, the third wave was just a few days before the election, and the first wave was a couple of months before the election. So all the way up to the election, the social circle estimates had actually a lower error of the election results. And then even if, so this is for overall election results, but then even if we predict the actual behavior of people in the sample, so now we focus just on 1,600 people that completed all 3 waves, and we look at their own intentions and their social circle estimates across waves. Now the y-axis is now percentage of average percentage of probability of voting for Clinton in blue or Trump in red, and the bottom is percentage of social circle that on average people said will vote for Clinton or for Trump. And so we see that according to this and all the other polls in that election, all the way to the end, people were saying, I'm going to vote for Clinton, more likely. And then when we asked them in who they actually voted for, we see that actually more were voted for Trump. So they kind of switched last moment. But if you look at their social circle estimate, you see that already in September, there was a switch between social circle estimates and for Trump and for Clinton. So kind of they were predicting what is going to happen. Better, I mean, they were more predictive of own behavior. Okay, then we tried this in other systems. Of course, US system is highly specific. So we did it in France, and this is now percentage of people voting for different candidates according to own intention. That's the blue line, the social circle, that's the red line, and the election results, that's the black line. And so we want all these kind of dashed lines to be as close as possible to the black line. And so, to facilitate the numbers in brackets in the legend show the error of these different methods. And so the social circle, in short, has somewhat lower error for predicting French elections, same in the Dutch elections, and in the Swedish elections in 2018. So you always see this, that actually averaging social circle estimates is better predictor of election results than averaging own intention estimates. And then finally, we did it also in 2018 and 20, and this is now, the y-axis is percentage point difference between Democrats and Republicans. And this is now results from the same poll. There is the light green is prediction of this difference by own intention question. The yellow is prediction by the social circle expectation, and the dark green are actual election results. And we see that social circle expectation was closer to the actual election results. That was both in 2018 and in 2020. So now the question is, why are they actually why is social sensing useful for predicting societal trends? Well, one explanation is, as I'm trying to convince you all along, that people know their social circles well, that they can provide information about contexts that are not in the poll. So in a way, you get this wisdom of local crowds. So, and it's important for this to work. The question must be about immediate social circle, not about people they don't know, but people they are actually in regular contact with, and on a representative sample, because each of these people, of course, are surrounded by people who vote like them. So you cannot just ask people in this room who your friends are going to vote for in the next election and get any kind of useful information from that. It must be a representative sample from the actual voting population. And on average, these homophilic biases cancel out and provide better picture, because we think one of the main reasons is that they provide information about people who do not pick up the phone when the pollster calls, who do not participate, or who even lie. In recent US elections, people are even lying who they are going to vote for just to stick it to the pollster. Okay. Then, of course, the second explanation is that this is a less embarrassing way to report voting for a controversial candidate. Back long time ago, when Trump was controversial candidate, this might have been the case. But we see along these 6 different elections, sometimes there was Le Pen was controversial candidate, there was a controversial candidate in the Netherlands. Sometimes social circle is better, sometimes own intention is better. We don't see consistent evidence for this, but it could play a role in some elections. And then what the interesting thing is also that these reports about social circle, as we saw in this US election at the beginning, is that it might foreshadow the future by through 2 processes. If I now report about my friends today, but I'm still different than them, chances are that in 2 months, I'm actually going to be influenced by them. So in a way, I'm predicting how I might be influenced in 2 months. And the other is friendship paradox. Let me explain. Let me show first the results for social influence. We did this in this American survey in 2016, where we had several ways of study. And so then we could do some Granger causality tests with all their problems. But what we see is that own intentions in wave 1 actually predict social circle estimates in wave 2. So it seems like Trump voters maybe convinced their friends also to get out and vote for Trump. But the opposite is also the case, that social circles in time 1 affect own intentions in time 2. And for Clinton voters, they were not so good in persuading their friends to vote for Clinton, apparently, but they were affected by their friends in the next time steps. So that's the social influence. That's interesting, I think. And then the other explanation is this friendship paradox, as you all know. So this is just a statistical regularity in social networks with any kind of variability in degree that my friends will, on average, have more friends than I have. And now this has interesting consequences, as shown in a nice study by Christakis and Fowler in 2010, and published in PLOS ONE, and some follow-up studies. That basically, if we want to predict flu outbreaks on campus, we select a sample of students. We ask them who their friends are, we throw the initial students away, and go to friends and ask them what are their symptoms. And these friends, because they have more friends on average, are more likely to be spreaders, more likely to first get the flu and then to spread the flu. And so by using the sample of friends, they actually get significant lead time so they can predict flu outbreaks significantly earlier by friend group than by that initial random group. And similar way, if we use our social circles to anticipate social trends, then our friends are actually in a way like this indicators of what might happen in the future, because they are more connected to the trends that we don't yet know of, and they're also more likely to spread these trends to us. So by reporting on our friends, we actually make use of this friendship paradox to get earlier predictions of what might come. So in sum, this asking people about their social circle can provide more accurate, maybe more timely predictions than asking them about their own intentions. And here I conclude, I think, exactly on time. So I was talking about human social complexity and human social cognition, in its particular social sensing. And I was showing different indicators that social sensing is actually quite accurate, that people are well adapted to their immediate social environments, and that it is useful to include it in models of belief dynamics, that we can get some interesting additional indicators of how belief dynamics works, and maybe get some ways to compare different models of belief dynamics. And then lastly, I showed that social sensing can be used to predict societal trends. Thank you. Questions? Shall I take my questions? I can take questions.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. That was fascinating. I'd like to ask a little bit into the last point that you raised, the last part. For one, I guess you can't argue with success. I mean, the social networking really seems to be a good predictor, but it surprises me for two reasons. One is that this ego bias you started to talk about in the beginning, and I guess maybe that could be a constant. Everybody has a similar ego bias. But the other thing is, and I know this would be true, I'm an American myself, so I know this is true of Americans. If you ask Americans to even understand what a percentage is, they have no idea what you're talking about. I mean, I could imagine that the uncertainties in any given estimate must be enormous.
Yeah, no, you're right. Actually, we did research on the understanding of percentages among Americans and Germans, and actually Americans are better than Germans because they calculate tips. So they're so we ask American what's 15% of something, they can actually calculate it. Germans, it's not. So, but it is true. So we go to great lengths to, in these surveys, give instruction. Imagine 100 people. If you say that 20 of them, then that's 20%. If you say 5, that's 5%. And then we give, we give these kind of different descriptions, and we go through that. So, but still, one can definitely expect a lot of noise there. And we are just hoping, and it seems that work well enough that it's probably random noise that cancels out. But yeah. One interesting direction, and we never are able to do this because these surveys are so expensive and we are kind of paying by the minute, is to connect it to see how numerous the skills of different people affect their estimates and whether it is better to ask people who are more numerate in some way. So I think that's an interesting direction. Yeah. When it comes to ego bias, it seems that this ego bias is it's definitely there when you ask about specific instances, but when you ask about relative frequencies, it appears that it's ego bias, but it actually might be just an accurate perception of the homophile in the environment. So we think that when we ask about these relative frequencies, this ego bias might actually not be a bias, but it's a reflection of the reality. And in any way, it is something that we hope will cancel out on a large enough sample, on a representative sample.
Thanks. I've got a question about whether or not you make a distinction between reported beliefs and, I don't know what we call them, actual beliefs or performed beliefs, something like that. So I'm thinking here of the example you gave of studying the personal and social beliefs about genetically modified foods.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like in a study like that, it could be the case that you ask someone, do you think a genetically modified food is very safe or very unsafe? And they just say, I believe it's very unsafe. But if you watch them go to the grocery store, they don't actually check anything.
Oh, yeah.
I'm wondering if you take that into account in any of this research or if there's a way to, because it seems like if you don't, what you're studying is reported beliefs and not beliefs.
Oh, that's a very good point. Yeah, we only study reported beliefs, and to the extent that these reported beliefs are correlated with other beliefs people have, we still can investigate our questions, but it is true that it might be useful to take into account some kind of social desirability of the question to kind of correct the prediction would be this, that if people are reporting what is socially desirable, but they are not actually believing that, then their correlations between those focal beliefs about safety of GM food would be less correlated to the other beliefs they might have about GM food, about big companies, environmental benefits, and so on. So it's an interesting idea to actually include maybe questions about social desirability as something that moderates these relationships. That's how I would see it, but yeah.
Well, it seems like, I mean, that might be one aspect of it. It might also just be that they haven't reflected enough in the first place. Even if you asked about it in the case of social beliefs, if you say, do you think that your local community believes that genetically modified foods are very safe or very unsafe? They might say, well, people in my local community think it's very unsafe. And then you could ask them, do you think that people in your local community check their vegetables when they go to the grocery store to see if it's genetically modified? And they might say, well, no, I'm pretty sure they don't. Mm-hmm. And if you ask them again, they'd say, okay, well, maybe they don't actually think that. So it might just be the case that you just need to prompt.
True.
Right? If we're getting very superficial reports of beliefs.
You're right. I mean, beliefs, there are different theories of how beliefs are formed, whether they are drawn from the shelf or whether they are constructed on the spot, and to the extent that they are constructed, which we also subscribe more, ideally it would be best to have opportunity to ask people over and over again what they think in different ways to get a better estimate of what they think. On the other hand, that process itself is encourages a construction process that wouldn't be there if it didn't interfere with them. It's a bit tricky.
Thank you.
Then I'll ask the next question here. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, you have the mic.
You want to go? Okay. Okay, sorry. I actually have two questions. And the first one is whether do you know, is there any evidence that this social sensing can impact whether you choose to go and vote or not? So if you're part of a group where everybody will go and vote for the same thing as you, or the opposite, do you know if you're more or less likely to go and vote? My other question is, I don't think this was what my neighbor here asked, but if you, instead of asking for the fractions, asked for a number of friends who would vote for either candidate, and you just summed up the number of votes for each candidate, do you know how this would affect your prediction?
So to the first question, yes. And those little Granger causality analysis that we did, is basically they do show that if I believe that people around me will vote for a particular candidate, I'm more likely to also go and vote for the particular candidate. We also did that on vaccination. I didn't show these results. But controlling for my own vaccination behavior in a previous season, that was the flu vaccination, if I know that many of my friends vaccinated, I'm more likely to go vaccinated next season. So there is definitely the social norm influence. And it's interesting in a vaccination case because you would think that it could be a game theoretic explanation where if more people are vaccinated, I don't have to. But it's actually a social norm. So people are influenced by others and they follow. And then for the, sorry, what was it?
Yes. Sorry, you can take. I forgot my other question, so it wasn't that important, I guess. Oh yeah. I was asking about the numbers instead of the fractions.
Numbers.
Sorry.
Yes, we thought about numbers as well, and actually in the vaccination study, we were doing this on the RAND panel, which is representative, another big panel, and they actually asked people, like, okay, think of your 15 friends, and now tell us all what you have for these 15 friends. And so we looked at that as well, and that also works, so you can calculate these percentages. But that people can do it just for a small, now you need to remember each instance. And so it's more difficult, I guess. And so, I think it would work based on that experience, but we usually kind of end up avoiding it just because it could be difficult. It could prompt some maybe other processes where you are trying to really remember what everybody would vote for, and we are more interested in this kind of general impression that might include also people when we try to recall a particular social content, we might actually forget someone, whereas we are asking for the general impression, we are hoping to get kind of indirectly implicit memory traces for as much of the social environment that we can grasp. So that's kind of the general idea, but more research is needed on that. And then, of course, in sociology, there is a large literature on estimating social network sizes. And to properly estimate the social network size, and that's also why we were kind of avoiding this whole thing and going to percentages. To properly estimate the social network size, that requires a lot of questions and triangulation, because it depends on the prompt, depends on how you're asking. So if I just ask, who do you see every day? Who do you borrow money from? Who do you ask for advice? You'll get different kinds of people. And then there are all kinds of memory biases. So you need to ask many different questions and then kind of bound it in different ways to get some estimate of social network size. And we never have time and money in these surveys to do that. So that was our other more pragmatic reason for just doing percentages. Mm-hmm.
Hi, and thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I have two questions as well. First one is probably easy to answer, but for these predictions that you make based on social sensing, do you need the same sample size as when you do predictions based on personal beliefs, or what you would do yourself? The other one, maybe you can answer that one first. Yeah.
That's super interesting. Because we looked at that, and actually, you can. So if you cut off 90% of the sample and just keep 10% of the sample, it's not published. It's just keep 10% of the samples with most diverse social circles, then you can get as good estimates, predictions, just relying on. Okay, this is a bit more complicated. But yes, if you select a sample, especially by selecting especially those who have diverse social circles, then one can actually save on the sample and get a similar prediction accuracy with a smaller sample. For that, of course, you still need to ask all these questions. So I don't know how exactly to do that, because in advance we don't know who has diverse social sample. But yeah, it's possible. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. And the other question is related to what you also just touched upon, namely vaccination hesitancy. Mm-hmm. I'm working with vaccination studies myself, using observational data, and this question about vaccination hesitancy is one that always comes back as a big source of bias. So first off is, as you have already worked a little bit with this, to what extent can you use these social sensing observations or estimates can they be used to back translate into a prediction of the personal probability of getting the next vaccine in line?
So we studied exactly that, and you can get a little bit more predictive accuracy of own behavior in the next season. The best way is still to ask people, are you going to vaccinate? But it's even after that and controlling for past behavior, including my perception of what other people are doing, will also contribute to the explanation of my behavior next time. And this goes mostly for actually risk estimate, because if I see more people vaccinating or more people, also another question was who had symptoms, then I perceive that the risk is higher, then I'll go to vaccinate more often. So that's how it works. But I should admit that the improvement is small. It's very small compared to actually asking people.
Thank you very much.
So, Mirta, thank you for the inspiring talk. So we come to the conclusion of the presentation, and I hope that you will join me in thanking Mirta Galesic for coming to DS and giving this inspiring lecture.
Thank you.